Hey everybody, so today we're going to be working on our December 2012 watercoloring card kit, and this month's card has a Magnolia image. Her name is Tilda with Cute Lamb, and I've already stamped her on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper with my Ranger Archival Jet Black ink. So let's get started. Alright, so this month I'm going to start by doing the outside of the image first so I don't touch any of the red or the green and spread it out into the background. So I've already got my Ranger Distress inks in the little ink palette right here, and I've got a medium and a small, or a medium and a detail zig water brush. I've got my little paper towel to wipe off on, and so let's get started. So I've made sure that my brush is wet by wiping it on the back of my hand. It's not leaving a mark, but it does feel damp when I wipe it on there. And if you want to learn more about that, there is a whole video about water brushes over somewhere on the list. So let's start with antique linen, and I'm going to do the outside of my image first, and I'm going to go right along the edge of her dress up here to her hair, and I'm just going to let my brush run out of ink almost, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And I'm going to use just the water I have on my brush to spread that ink away from her body and out here into the outside. And if I get to the bottom, I'm going to wipe my brush off again, and I'm going to go back up and just lightly feather that, and that'll make the line disappear out here into the paper. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab me a little bit more because I want to go all the way around. So I'm going to again start where I left off. So let's go around these flowers and let my brush almost run out, and then wipe it off, and then just use the water to spread that ink out into the background. And then I'm going to go back after I wipe my brush off and wipe it just a little bit more. And let's do this side. I'm going to go right along my girl, right up here until I get back to where I started. Wipe the brush off, and then take just the water and wipe that away from your girl. And wipe your brush off, and every time my brush leaves the screen, I'm either wiping it on my paper towel or I'm picking up more ink. Just feather that right out until there's no more harsh line. It just gradually blends out until it's just the paper. So it gives her a nice little halo around her body, and you could go back if you want to darken it up and add a little bit more, but I'm liking how that looks. So next I'm going to go and I'm going to do the ground, and for that I used pumice stone. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush. And I purposely didn't start my shadow at the bottom of her because I want it to appear that the wall goes up a little bit more, or the ground goes. She's not just sitting flat on the ground. Okay, so I've added my ink. I'm wipe my brush off, and then just water. I'm going to go back and spread that line away from the line. Okay, and I've got ink on my brush, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe it off again. And I'm going to go back with just water and feather that even more out so that it disappears. Okay, let's grab a little bit more. Now let's do this side, and I'm going to continue along the bottom here and just bring that right around that tail. And then wipe your brush off, and then just use the water to spread that out. And my brush has collected quite a bit of ink, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe that off again, and then I'm just going to come back and soften that line again even more. That looks pretty good for a first coat. I think I'm going to let that dry for a second, and then I'm going to go add just a little bit more. And I got a little bit on her dress, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe that off. And I got a little bit on his little tail, so let's get that wet and dab that away. Okay, so I want to add just a little bit more of a shadow, I think, underneath of her, just a little bit. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of my ink, and I'm just going to go right along the edge here of her. Just give it a little bit more dark. And wipe my brush off. And then just go back over that line with my water and soften that out. There, that looks better. It looks like she's casting a shadow where she sits there. So we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to go up here and we're going to start her skin. Okay, so I've let that dry, so I'm going to go up here and we're going to work on her skin. And for that, I'm going to start with my Tattered Rose. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on the end of my brush. And I'm going to lay down my pin where I want it to be the darkest first. So I want her arm to be the darkest on the inside. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my ink right down the inside of her arm and along the bottom of her hand. And then if I get to the bottom and I still have ink, I'm going to wipe it off. And then I'm going to use just the water in my brush to spread this ink out and cover the rest of her arm. Like that. Okay, and then I'm going to grab a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing for this hand. And I want it to be darkest down here at the bottom. Maybe a little bit underneath of his little ear, just a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off and use just the water to spread that up into her hand. I didn't get enough on my brush, so I'm going to go back and add a little bit more. There we go. That's a little bit darker. And just wipe that around until you've covered in her whole hand. And let's go get her neck. And same for her neck. I want it to be darkest underneath of her chin. And then let's give it a little bit next to this little sheep. And then wipe it off. And then use what you laid down to spread out onto the rest of her neck. Okay. And let's go do her face. Let's go right along the edge of her hair. And her hair is going to be brown, so if I get a little bit in there, I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to go all the way around her face, and I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to use this ink I laid down on her outside to just wipe towards the middle. And if it doesn't cover the whole thing, that's okay, because we're going to come back and add another coat. So I'm just very lightly bringing that into the middle of her face. That looks pretty good for a first coat. So I'm going to go, I like how this arm down here looks, but this arm, this hand over here, I need it to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to grab just a little bit more now that it's dry. And I'm going to add a little bit more on there. And I let it dry in between coats, and then I come back and add more layers as I see that it needs it. Oops, and I colored his ear again, so let's wipe that off. So that adds a little bit more color to that. And now her neck and her face have dried, so I'm going to go add a little bit more to her neck. Just go along the edge there. And just darken that up just a little bit more. Okay, and let's go up here and do her face one more time. Go down this side, because her face is tipped this way, so I want her face to be darker on this side than it is over here where it's facing up. Okay, and let's just wipe that ink out here into the middle. Add a little bit more color. Fill in this little patch that I didn't cover the first time. Okay, I'm liking how that pink that is, so we're going to add a little bit of shadows, but I'm going to let that dry for just a second. Okay, so we've let that dry just a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some of my mixed paint, and I've mixed Tattered Rose with a little dab of tea dye, and I keep that just mixed in my ink palette now because I use it all the time. But if you want to make a little bit on your acrylic sheet or whatever, that would be fine. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of that mixed paint, and I'm going to add just where I want it to be shadowed a little bit more. So I'm going to lay it down there on her hand, and then I'm just going to use that little bit and my water just to brush it out just enough to soften that line. And I'm going to wipe my brush off again because there's still ink on it, and just feather it out here into that other side of her arm. Because I want it to stay dark in the shadowed area, but I don't want it to have a huge line on there where I painted it on. So go do that same thing to this other hand. So again, I've grabbed a little bit of my mixed paint, and I'm just going to put a little bit down here on the bottom of her hand. And then just soften that line with the water brush. Get a little bit here underneath of her chin. Again, just water. And I'm just softening that line. Now let's go do her face. So for her face, we're going to go right along the shadow again. I want it to be darker over here I ran out of paint, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. Darker on this side over here. Maybe a little bit underneath of her hair right here. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And I'm just going to go in with just the water and just soften that line. That looks pretty good. And I didn't put it on this side because her face is kind of tipped up to the light, so I wanted it to be more shadowed on this side over here. Alright, so now I'm going to add her cheeks, and for that I've mixed a little bit of my Tattered Rose with aged Mahogany here on my little acrylic, on my laminated sheet. I just dipped my brush in the Tattered Rose and splattered it down here on the paper, and then I grabbed a tiny bit of the aged Mahogany on the end of my brush and put it into that and mixed it up. And then now I've wiped my brush off because I don't want all that excess paint on there. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of that mixed paint, and I'm going to add some cheek color. I'm just going to lightly brush, and I use these little dots that she already has on her face as a guide to where my cheeks are going to go. So I just put a little bit on there, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off and soften that edge just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for this side. Put a little bit on here. And then wipe my excess ink off and just lightly go over the edges so that it doesn't have that big line right there. Okay, and then you let it dry for just a second. If you're impatient like me, I pick it up and I fan it around while I'm coloring. It dries a little bit faster. I get impatient when I'm coloring. And then I'm going to darken it up just a little bit more. So I'm going to grab a little bit more, and I'm just going to add some more on here. Like so. Wasn't quite dark enough. You can also go and add a little bit more aged Mahogany to your little dab of mixed paint, and that will darken the paint up a little bit. And I always try, after I've mixed them up, when I'm coloring, I will try them out a little bit on a scratch paper so that they're not, make sure it's the color I want before I just blob it on there. Alright, so when I went to edit the video evidently ate the hair part of this video, so I'm having to recolor that and add this in. So if she looks different, that's why it's a whole different picture, because I have to redo her hair. And that's also why I now have bats on my finger, because it's later in the day. So I'm going to go ahead and color her hair, and I'm going to go ahead and do that with Walnut Stain. And I've also switched to my detail brush, so I have the small brush because it's got a little end. And to do her hair, I'm going to do right here in the roots first. I'm just going to add a little bit in there. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off because there's still a lot of ink on there. And I'm just going to use my water on my brush to bring that out just a little bit. And if I get too much ink pooling up on the end of my brush, I'll wipe it off further. So do that. And I'll grab a little bit more Walnut Stain. And she's also got her hair kind of floops up right here. So I'm going to go ahead and add some Walnut Stain right in there. So I need a little bit more on my brush. And I'm just going to go right down along her cheek right here where it kind of gets close. Like that. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off and use water to just spread that little bit of paint away and out here towards my white. And I want to do the same thing going the other way, so I'm going to turn it a little bit here. And I'm just going to wipe my line this way up towards the top of her head until it runs out of ink. And let's get her little bangs. So I'm going to put a little bit up here at the top of her bangs, and then right here it goes in between the leaf. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit in there and wipe my excess off, and then just use that little bit of ink that I laid down to bring down further onto this little curl. Okay, we'll let that side dry and let's go do the other side. So again, I'm going to start right up here at the roots. So I'm going to add a little bit right here at her root line. And then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off my brush. And I'm just going to pull that ink further down onto her hair. Okay, my brush has gathered quite a bit of ink. You can see it there on the end. So I'm going to wipe that off again. Then I'm going to come back in and use just water to pull that down further on her hair. And let's get a little bit more for the curly Q on this side. So grab a little bit more. I'm going to add some of that right here. And I'm going to wipe that little bit of extra I got on there off. And I'm just going to come right back and soften that line. Okay, let's go up here, and I think I'll add a little bit of a shadow right where her hair goes underneath this little flower. So I'm going to put a little bit of ink right in there, and then wipe my brush off again, and then just use the water in my brush to soften that line. And I think I'll add a little bit right here underneath this little flower petal, but she's got a little curl there, so I'm going to miss the little curl and then pull that ink down. Let's add a little bit more right here where her face is tipped down. Just bring that up in here. And again, she's got a little curly Q right here, and I want that to stay lighter, so I'm going to skip that. I've just added a little bit of brown on there, but I want that to stand out, so I'm not going to paint that quite so dark. And let's add a little bit more to her roots. And maybe a little bit more underneath right here. Maybe I'll bring that up just a little bit. And getting that indentation where her hair looks like it's curling up there a little bit. Okay, that's her hair. Alright, so for her dress we're going to use peeled paint, and I've switched back to my medium brush because there's a lot of space there and I want to be able to wipe it around quicker than with the detail brush. So I'm going to grab a little bit of peeled paint, and let's start on her sleeve. So I want her sleeve to be darkest on this side because her face is tipping up, so I want the light to kind of come from over here and this side of her sleeve to be lighter. So I'm just going to brush a little bit down the edge of her sleeve, like that, and then I'm going to wipe off my excess, and I'm going to come back and use just the water again to come out here to the other side. Okay, that's pretty good for a first coat, so we're going to let that dry, but we're going to go down here and work on the bottom of her dress. So again, I grab some more of my paint, and I want it to be dark right here along the edge of her dress. So I'm going to go ahead and let me turn my girl so I can try to stay in the lines. And I'm just going to go right along the edge of her booty. I ran out of paint, so I went and got a little bit more, because I want it to be dark all the way across here. Okay, like that. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to come back, and just with my water, I'm going to pull that line up here into her dress. And it's okay that it doesn't cover the whole thing, because we're going to come back and add another coat. The whole watercoloring is all about layering. So you just add until you run out, and then you let it dry, and you come back and you add a little bit more. So that looks pretty good for a first coat. Turn her back around here so I can see. And I got some kind of little string right there. Let's pull that off. Okay, so let's add a little bit underneath of the little sheep's face. So grab a little bit of your paint on your brush. Okay, and it's going to be dark where he's, whoops, what I got on my finger. I picked up some paint in my palette on my finger, so I better not get that on anything. Let's wipe that off. Okay, so it's going to be dark where he's laying, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit underneath of his chin. I'm being careful because it's a pretty small spot. And then just bring some water in and move that ink out here into her dress. There, that looks pretty good. So let's go do some more on her sleeve since that has dried. Okay, so again, I'm going to lay down where I want it to be darkest, so I'm going to go right along this seam right here. And I'm going to wipe my excess ink off because I got a lot on there. And I'm just going to come in and pull that ink over here onto this side. And I try not to fiddle with it too much because the peeled paint will turn like a yellowish color if you play with it too many times. So I just kind of lightly go over it and then let it dry and then come back and add more if I need to. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the bottom of her dress again. So grab you a little bit more. Come along here and add a little bit up here. And I'm going to leave that little bit of paint I have on my brush still on there because I need to cover up a little bit more area. So I'm just going to continue to go along my line and brush that ink up here onto her knee. I mean, I want it to be light up here at the top, but I want it to be a green color too, like the paper. Not like the paper, but like the dress. Okay, so let's go add a little bit more underneath of his chin, maybe a little bit. So I'm going to go in here right underneath my little sheep. Add a little bit more right in there. Okay, and this time I'm going to go up here and I'm going to get a little bit onto, she's got like a collar on her dress, but I made the bottom part green. And then I put some stickles on the top part, so I'm going to go in and paint that little bottom part of her collar, just a little bit. There, that looks pretty good. Maybe bring a little bit of paint down here a little bit. Okay. That doesn't look too bad. I think I'll add a second coat though. So I'm going to let that dry for just a second because I got it pretty wet that time, and I'm going to go up here, her hair's dried, and I'm going to add a little bit of color to the flower. And so the flower I used fired brick for my first coat. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on the end of my brush. And I didn't worry about these little dots that were in here because I went in later and put down my white gel pen. I used my Sharpie white paint pen to add those back in. So I'm just going to go in and add this color right onto all these cute little leaves. And I'm going to try not to go outside of the lines because red is very unforgiving. It just, with me, I can never seem to get it off of stuff once I get it on there. And I'm just going to color all those leaves in. like that. That looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go down here and add another coat to her dress. I want to darken up this bottom part just another little bit. So I'm going to grab some of my peeled paint, and I'm just going to go along the edge of her dress here. Around the back, like this. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe that excess ink off. And I'm going to come back in with just my water, and I'm going to spread this ink onto her dress a little bit more. Alright, I like that. I'm going to leave it just like that. That looks really good for shading because it's really dark down here where it's touching the ground and her arm, but it's light up here on her knee and kind of right here where the light could be shining on it in the back of her sleeve. So let's do... I have to let her dry a little bit more before we work on the sheep. So let's go add a little bit of shadow to our flower. And for that, I'm going to use my fired brick. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my fired brick on the end of my brush and add it to my little laminated sheet. And then I'm going to mix just a tiny dab of aged mahogany in there. Just add a little bit of darkness. Oh, might need just a little tab more. Okay. So we're going to use that to do some shadows onto our little flower up here. And I think I'll switch to my detail brush. And make sure it's wet. Wipe it on your hand. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my mixed paint. And I'm going to darken up these back leaves for sure. Oops, and I squished my brush too much because that's a lot of water on there. Let's wipe that off just a little bit. Okay, let's get the back leaves first. I want those to be a lot darker than the front leaves. I'm going to get this one that's behind over here. Okay, and then I'm just going to take, and there's some great lines already on these leaves for you. So I'm going to put a little dab of my dark color right here in the center, and then I'm just going to use my brush to kind of go up a few of those little lines and darken those up. And they're not neat and tidy because the brush isn't really tiny. If you really wanted to add some tiny ones, you could just take your distress marker and aged mahogany and go right over those lines. But I'm not going to go over that. I didn't bring that in here to my room today. So let's do like that and maybe soften that one just a little bit. But I like how the red color looks on the flower now. So that's mostly what I'm looking at, is the shadows on my flower to see what it looks like. So now let's go do our sheep. So the sheep is weathered wood, and I didn't color the whole sheep in. I just used the weathered wood to add a little bit of shadows on his skin. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit on my paintbrush, and I want it to be dark down here on the bottom of his foot. And he's got some great little dots already on there for you. So I just kind of used the little dots that were there as a guide. And then I'm going back over my line with just the water in my brush. Let me wipe off my mixed paint here so I don't get that on my arm. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more. And let's say her arm here is going to cast a little bit of shadow, so I'm going to put a little bit on there. But it's pretty dark on there, so you want to be careful when you're putting it down. Maybe a little bit underneath of her hand here and down this little side of his body. But just kind of look at it and say, is there a shadow there? Would it be shadowed where her arm is following? His belly is going to be shadowed because he's right next to her body. But I don't want to turn him this blue-green or this blue-gray color, so I'm just using it pretty sparingly in the shadowed spaces so that it'll add just a little bit of a shadow without turning him blue. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's go up here, and he's got this great little crease on his nose, so I'm going to add a little bit in there, and then right here where his ear would touch his head, I'm going to add a little bit. And then go back in with just my water and soften that line. looks alright. So let's do, thinking he maybe needs a little bit right here where his little cheek is and where his leg touches his body, or her body. Let's give that just a little bit of a shadow in there. And I wiped most of it off down here on his little tail, so I'm going to go back and add just another little bit in there. Darken up his leg just a little bit. Didn't look like there was any on there after it dried. Okay, I'm liking the shadows in that. That looks really good. So for the inside of his ear, it looks like I used worn lipstick to give that a little bit of a pink color. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of that. And I'm just going to dab that onto the inside of his ear. Like that. And then I also made his little cheeks have a little bit of a pink. So I'm going to take my worn lipstick that's still on my brush and just give that a little bit of a swoosh. And then I'm going to wipe off that excess because I had quite a bit. And just take a little bit of my water and just kind of soften that line around the outside there a little bit. I don't want it too pink. But like that. So that looks pretty good. Let's put her together. Alright, so I've got all my parts here, so let's go ahead and glue my girl to the mat. I'm going to stick that right on here like so. And then I'm going to attach this red piece to the mat. This. Then I'm going to attach this green piece. And it's kind of cattywampus, so I'm just going to make it crooked and stick that on there. And then it's got this little piece with the words or the singing on it, music paper. Okay, and that one looks like it's about right here. That looks pretty good. Like that. And then we are going to put this ribbon on here. So I'm going, whoops, my snowflake stuck. So I'm going to take my ribbon and I'm going to cut it so I can tape it on here. So I cheat and I'm going to just take my Scotch tape and stick this down like that with a piece of Scotch tape. And then I'm going to flip it over and tape it to the back. Like that. Okay, so I've went ahead and added the pop dots to the back of my image, and I'm going to go ahead and stick her on. And she is going to go, well, let's glue the image down first before I put that on, because it'd be too bulky. So let's attach this part to the card base. Okay, so let's put that onto the card base. That way I don't have to worry about it being up off the table. And then stick the girl on. That makes more sense. Okay, so we're going to stick her right there, and I try to make sure she's kind of sitting straight, not sitting, sideways on the card. And stick her. And then I'm going to wrinkle my ribbon up here. So I cheat and I take a glue dot and I just wrinkle the ribbon up so it looks like it's tied and stick it like that. And then I'm going to grab a glue dot on the back of my bow, and I already tied my bow with my Bow Easy, and there's a whole nother video on that if you want to watch that. I'm just going to glue dot my ribbon right on there, and then you trim the little bows however long you want those. This one's being persnickety on this side. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's do these great little snowflakes we've got here too. So I'll push her out of the way. So I've got a gold snowflake and 2 gold snowflakes and 2 white snowflakes. I'm going to attach the white snowflake on top of this big gold snowflake with some liquid glue. And I kind of set it off so that the bigger prongs are not even with they go with the little prongs, and you just got to kind of work with it so that they stick out. I want to be able to see the gold on the outside too. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and glue this gold one to this white one. And there's a little star shape in the middle. I didn't punch all those out, so you may want to remove that before you glue it down. Totally up to you. You can even put the star somewhere else onto your card, unless it fell out when I was packaging them up. I didn't go to all the trouble of poking out all the little stars or these little holes in the middle of all these snowflakes. That is a special job for you guys. So I've got all those, and then we're going to attach these to the card. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of glue to the back of this one. And this one's missing oh, here it is. See, I've lost one of my snowflakes. Snowflake goes, so I have to put another gold snowflake on the top of this one before I glue it down here. Add that. There, that looks better. Much more sparkly. And this paper is some Best I didn't get enough glue on there. This paper is Best Creations glittered cardstock that you can get in the store. And the glitter's already on the paper, which makes it perfect because you don't have to make a mess if you don't want to get be wearing glitter and sparkles everywhere. You just punch them out or cut them out with your dies, and then the glitter just stays on there. It doesn't get on you. Even when you touch it, it's on the paper. There's no mess. Love it. Okay, so let's go ahead and attach this to our card. Put some glue on the back there. And let's put that up here. And mush that down. Okay, now put some glue on the back of this one. And I'm going to put that one over here, like that. And then while those are drying just a little bit, I'm going to take my stickles, and I'm going to add some stickles to the cuff of her dress right here, and the collar of her dress, just a little bit. Okay, and then I want to stickle, well, let's not stickle that yet. Let's add our white Sharpie paint pen to these dots up here on my flower that I covered up with paint. Let's give her a couple of dots on her cheek. And then we'll give that a second to dry. I'm going to add some stickles to her hat. So while that's drying, let's go ahead. You got a package of pearls in your kit this month, so you can add the pearls to your snowflakes or the card or whatever you want. And you got a whole package. These are just, I've used these bunches of times. You'll have plenty of little pearls for everything. And so let's add some pearls to the center of my snowflakes. Like that. That looks pretty good. Whoops. And let's, while I'm still waiting for that to dry just a little bit more, I'm going to take my liquid pearls and I'm going to add some little pearl dots around the outside of my girl. So I'm just going to squish some out here and make little teepees, however many you want to have. Kind of makes it look like there's snow falling outside. She's maybe sitting out on the ground and The snow's falling. But they make little, when you put it down, it makes a little cone. Okay. And then to make them flatten out, I take it and I pound it on my hand. So I'm just going to give it a couple of few whaps. Like that, and it makes the circles flatten out. And you may have to do it a couple of times, and I usually do it on the edge of my countertop or my cutting board. So now that these have dried up here, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of stickles to my leaves. And you can add as much or as little as you like. Just going to glitter it up a little bit. Like that. That looks pretty good. So that is our December watercoloring card kit this month. If you'd like to see if it's available, head over to the store and check it out. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.